Morning.
So, all right. So as you know, we have a line of duty death discussion every month assigned to us. This month was for 141's crew. So myself, and the rest of the guys, JT and Doug and DJ and Askaslet, and Parson and Laws all got together and we went over and discussed a few different items we wanted to talk about. We want to keep it local, so we went with Scott Davis from Muncie Fire Department. It's obviously within the last 8 years from his line of duty death, so it's close to home. It's always close to home when it's another brother or sister, but it's even closer when it's right here in our home state, just a few miles away. So with that being said, obviously I'm sure you guys know quite a bit about it already, but we're just going to go ahead and discuss those key factors of what happened and his role that he played, and as well as some of the other things that happened in that. All right, a little bit about Scott. Scott was married to his wife, Rhiann. They married in 1996. He was born in June of 1970. And then his end of watch was June 15th of 2011, so the same month of his birthday. 3 children, Jake, Emma, and Max. Those children were 14, 11, and 9 at the time of his death. Scott worked for Yorktown Fire Department as a volunteer for 15 years. The last 5 years of those 15, he was the fire chief there. Then after leaving Yorktown, he was hired on full-time at Muncie Fire and was there for 6 years. He held firefighter 1 and 2, rope tech, EMT, fire medic, vehicle machinery tech, instructor 1s, and then all his NIM certifications as well. All right. So Muncie Fire Department at the time of the incident had gone through some changes just 2 years prior to the incident occurring. Those changes they were operating out of 5 stations. They had 7 total at the time. Then they had received some layoffs in 2009, causing them to close 2 of their fire stations. They lost 32 members of their fire department. They cover 39 square miles, population of 67,000, 24-hour shifts, but they work a 24 on, 24 off, 24 on, so they work 4 on with a 5-day rotation of days off. 103 uniformed members total, 5 engines, 2 Quints, 2 rescues, and 2 aerials. And again, later on in the presentation, you'll see that they were operating in different apparatus as well than what they normally do. So Station 1 was one of the houses that was shut down, so it became the training facility, training offices. Station 2 had Rescue 2 and Truck 2. Station 3 was an engine and reserve ladder. Station 4 was another one of those that were shut down. And they actually, 2 of the reasons, one was because of layoffs, and the second reason they shut down that house was due to flooding in the area. The house had retained water inside of it. So they had moved from Station 4, out of Station 4, and then Station 6 was actually running out of Station 1. So they had some other movements because they had some other issues with another one of their firehouses. All right, so Station 5 is Engine 5 and Reserve Engine. Station 6 is a Battalion, Engine 6, 7, Truck 7, Pump 7, and then EMS is provided by the county. All right, so at the time of the incident, there's 30 personnel on each 24-hour tour, 2 captains, 5 lieutenants. They try to maintain the 4 personnel per apparatus. That wasn't always met, so the union did have an agreement with them that they could do 3 per apparatus. Again, at the time, 2009, they had layoffs, so 32 firefighters, so that lowered their staffing by 1/3. 2 stations closed, Again, one of those becoming the training office, and then the second house, which we'll see in the later slides, that was closed was Station 4. It was 1.5 miles from the incident. Prior to reductions, the fire department was able to get at least 14 personnel on scene within 8 minutes, 86% of the time. That actually reduced down to 39% once they lost those additional firefighters and closed those houses. So that's quite a drop there. The incident was at 2200 East Fusion Road. It was a Tabernacle of Praise church. So as you can see in this slide, Station 4 down here on the bottom right, that would have been the station if it was open. It would have been closest to that responding area. As you can see on that picture on the right there, that's where the church was located. And then firefighter Scott Davis was actually on engine 2 that day, but again we'll see that they were operating on engine 2, but he was actually Tower 3 personnel, but Tower 3 was out of service for issues, so they were operating out of engine 2 that day. So there was quite a bit of things that added into this, that came together that had this incident. So that day, the interior crew officer was a lieutenant assigned with the interior crew. He had been for the department for approximately 17 years. So, if you back up one here. All right, so Scott and another firefighter had actually joined up with that crew. So that wasn't his original officer when they got on scene. He joined up with this crew, this lieutenant at the time. So again, 17 years on the department, held multiple certificates as well, and NIMS. So he seemed like a pretty well-rounded officer there. The IC at the time of the incident had been with the department for 25 years, holding the rank of captain. So the IC was actually Truck 2's officer. The BC was not on scene yet. He didn't arrive till later on in the incident, and we'll see that when we go through the timeline. But again, held multiple certifications as well. You know, yearly refreshers in building construction, fire behavior, confined space, and all that stuff there. All right, so the BC, who he actually arrived when the collapse happened, right before the collapse happened.
Ladder 141, 7703, Jessica, Maine.
Do you want to stay here? You take it?
Ladder
Yeah, one of the engines,
141,
you want to take that?
7703, Jessica, Maine.
I think we could stay on it, because we've already did the presentation, leave them here. Billy and-
Oh, you're running with 4?
Yeah.
All right, yeah, go ahead.
Sorry, I wasn't trying to.
No, how many people we have? No. That's why I printed that paper off, sitting on the seat next to me. What do I have?
Good. All right.
Sorry, Cruz, I got you.
All right, so again, the BC had 18 years of experience, multiple certificates, and he took command following the collapse. All right, so the structure itself. So it was added on, and the space that the fire was in was added on in 1991. Excuse me, no, that was the original, there was added additional. The fire occurred within the space of the church that was constructed in 1991. It was 50 by 84 feet, contained wood frame construction, brick veneer finish, and it was on a concrete slab. The interior of the structure had been completely consumed by fire following the collapse. The interior walls and ceilings were reported to have been covered with drywall and vaulted ceilings containing suspended lighting, speakers, and fans. The lightweight roof truss system, believed to be either 2x4 and 2x6 lumber, connected with gusset plates, spanned the width of the sanctuary and ran the length of the sanctuary. A 3 to 4 foot void space was above that with blown-in insulation existed between the ceiling and the roof. Much of the roof truss system was consumed by the fire, and exterior load-bearing walls had collapsed or had crumbled prior to the NIOSH investigating. At the south end, and we'll see these on some pictures, at the south end of the church, the steeple rested atop the sanctuary's roof. The roof was covered with asphalt shingles. The system was not sprinkled, and the other thing was there was no hydrants in that area, but they also had not pre-planned. And that was one of the things that Muncie hadn't done very well, was doing pre-plans of their areas. So on the left here, you'll see the sanctuary. You'll notice the steeple there. So that's the facility that was built in 1991, and that's where our fire is going to be located. And we'll see that later on. They did make entry, so this is going to be the alpha side up here. They actually made entry from this side through this corridor here, and then they come back around and in. And the main part of the fire, when we get to those photos, you're going to see is right here where the steeple is. So here's an inside view of that sanctuary. So that's looking from the alpha side back to the Charlie side. So that steeple obviously would be above where the pulpit and all that is. All right, again, water supply. It's non-hydrated area. So originally truck 2, engine 3, and engine 6 arrived on scene, and that was the initial water supply for this fire. Truck 2 had 400 gallons of water, and the engines had 1,000 gallons each. So 2,400 gallons total on the initial arriving apparatus. At that time, a second alarm was hit and asking for tankers for mutual aid from other departments around the area. Again, you can see engine 6, truck 2, and engine 3 parked at the top there on the A side. And that's actually where command was set up too, was right there in front of the A side. But I believe between truck 2 and engine 3 are close in that proximity. And again, that's where they made their entry. All right, so initially dispatched by radio assignment included truck 2, rescue 2, engine 3, tower 3, engine 1, and the acting BC. Again, tower 3 was out of service, requiring the crew to take engine 2, which was a spare. And so engine 2 is going to be the one that Scott Davis was riding that day. Truck 2, 400 gallons of water. Driver, 2 firefighters, and a captain, so 4 personnel. Rescue 2, again, 4 personnel. Engine 2 with 3 personnel, and then engine 3 with 3 personnel as well. Engine 6, again, they were initially on the scene with 1,000 gallons, and then the acting BC truck 2 was the initial IC, requested second alarm upon arrival of the incident. So when we listen to that radio traffic, we'll hear him hit for them and specifically ask for that second alarm as soon as he's arriving. All right, so it was obviously mid-June, so we know how it is here in mid-June. That day was actually ranging temperatures of 60s. And they had winds out of the south-southeast at 10 to 15 miles per hour during the incident. So, and the other part of that was once the sanctuary itself vented and after the roof connecting hallway was vented, the order of 10 to 20 mile per hour are sufficient to create wind-driven fire conditions in a structure within an uncontrolled flow path. All right, so our incident timeline. The dispatch center received numerous calls. They actually received calls at 10:45 that morning about possible smoke in the area from a passerby. But nothing was ever done with that. And then the same passerby is the one that called back in at 10:45 and said, hey, Now there's even more smoke coming from that, or 1345, or 1535, saying that, hey, there's more smoke in this area. It's, you guys need to get over here and take a look at it. So, originally dispatched between 1549 and 1552 hours. Again, we heard, seen earlier who they dispatched, so Truck 2, Rescue 2, Engine 3, Tower 3, which, ended up being Engine 2, Engine 1, and the BC report of a fire. They did not have an exact address at the time, because again, it was people driving by that seen it. It was reported in there like it's on Fusion Road somewhere, we're not sure, but here's about where the cross streets are. Updated at 1554, so 2 minutes in, 5 minutes in, depending on how you look at it, with additional 911 calls indicating heavy smoke from the roof. All right, 1555, again asking for that exact address, and dispatch is like, well, we have a possible address of, again, they weren't 100% sure on that yet. Truck 2 at 1557, Truck 2 officers stated they were arriving, visible flames and heavy smoke. At that time, he took command, and we'll see later when we look through the investigation portion of it, there was not a 360 completed on this fire. So that's one of the bigger things that led into, on top of the other issues. So again, dispatch confirmed and asked if they wanted if they needed a second unit, and who they would want. And the BC advised at that time they just wanted Station 5 and 7 and to notify the fire chief. And again, the EMS provided by the county was dispatched as well. All right, so 5 and 7 are dispatched. Engine 5, Engine 6 en route. Engine 6, Rescue 2 and the BC are on scene at 1600 hours. The IC requests mutual aid from tankers. And again, I don't know, I tried doing some research on this, but I guess on their initial second alarm requests, they don't send, I don't think they had a list of tankers or a list of apparatus. It was pretty much whoever the IC said they wanted at that time. 1604 and 1605 hours, interior crew possibly made entry about this time. Again, it wasn't marked on the radio when they made entry, so it was kind of a guesstimate there. Mutual aid was en route, and then dispatch advised IC that mutual aid departments had been dispatched and whether he needed additional units. Then the IC notified dispatch that for all their tankers that he could get. So in this photo, and we'll cover it more, but if you guys look, obviously this is where the initial amount of fire was. I don't know how far into the incident this was, but it was right in the beginning from my understanding. And if you look right here, you can see the steeple laying on top of the roof here. So that's one of those things that wasn't noticed because the 360 was not completed because this was on the Charlie side. So if that would have been noted by them, by the IC or whoever doing the 360, that's something that definitely could have been radioed over, saying, hey, the steeple's already fallen over. We've got some concerns, and we do have 2 firefighters standing down here at this corner here on the Alpha and Delta side here as well. So, and again, it wasn't noticed, it wasn't ever radioed about that information. 1606, mutual aid tankers are en route. 1607, again, more mutual aid tankers. Second County Ambulance at 1608. 1609, Rescue 2 officer within the church sanctuary asked the IC if they had established a water supply yet because they weren't doing well with the 1 3/4 line. So again, they chose an 1 3/4 line for a church fire. Again, it's one of those things that just added into what they were already doing. I know with confidence here, that, we're pulling a deuce and a half. So, unfortunate events that just led up to a very unfortunate event. So again, obviously we can see in this photo, and I don't know the exact timeline that the photos were taken, but we can see that fire is developing and just growing exponentially within minutes. So I think that I want to say the timeline from the time of his arrival to the time that they had unintelligible radio traffic was like 8 minutes. So you're looking at 250 times plus, the amount of fire from the original time that they arrived on scene. So that thing had gained quite a bit of development over the stages. So at between 1610 and 1615 hours, they received unintelligible distress radio transmission from interior crew. Yelling was heard with possible audio of the collapse. There was no mayday stated or requested. And again, we'll see in the later information that their mayday training was not there or was not where it needed to be. So it was not recognized as a mayday issue for these guys to call that in. So interior crew members escaped through the windows or follow a hose line out of sanctuary for safety. BC took over as IC at that time. Request EMS assign the truck 2 officer, initial IC was search and rescue for the victim. The interior crew at that time, that's the interior crew members responded back to the command post and determined the victim was unaccounted for. IC and Engine 5 a conversation where Engine 5 should position their apparatus. Over the radio, IC requests Engine 5 and Truck 7 personnel to come to the front of the building because they had a firefighter down. IC and dispatcher have a conversation about sending available tankers. Again, there was a lot of radio traffic, and we'll hear that going on at the same time while Scott's missing and being unaccounted for. There was, and again, and this is my opinion, some unnecessary radio traffic about tankers and some other issues of apparatus placement. At that time, it should have been all about Scott. Advised dispatch to notify Unit 101, so the chief, about the firefighter down and missing. Attempted to contact the victim over radio without any response. They said we can see him, whole church is down, we've got a pile of rubble about 3 feet deep. It's all on fire, we can't see anything. We're going to have to wait to get it out before we can go through it. So again, in that radio traffic, we can see in, but they couldn't see him. All they could see is 3 foot of pile of rubble. So again, and this is within 10 minutes, 40, let's see here. So let me back up here. So engine 2 was en route at 15:55 hours. So this was within 10-15 minutes of them being on scene already, when he had become unaccounted for and the collapse happened. All right, so at 17:04, a news helicopter flying over the incident locates Scott in the middle of the sanctuary in a pile of rubble. So, and again, I don't know if, obviously they were probably listening to the radio traffic, in the helicopter and just happened to be flying over, looking down and located him. And I know it's kind of blurry, but as you can tell, these are obviously personnel standing there outside. start the speaker.
Tower 3, Issue 1, BC, we have report of a church fire. All we have is around Highway 3 and Fusion, a church fire around Highway 3 and Fusion. We are getting more than one call, but we don't have an exact location yet. They said smoke was pouring out of the roof. Ground 1. Getting report Meeker in the bypass. It's a church there at Meeker and the bypass.
You guys hear that okay?
We've got a report of 2200 East Fusion, 2200 East Fusion, smoke coming from the roof, fire, smoke coming from the roof, getting numerous calls. Rescue 2. We've got 2200 East Fusion, and we also have Meeker in the bypass. Engine 3.
Radio BC en route.
That's truck 2. We have an exact address yet. Have a possible 2200 East Fusion, possible.
Radio engine 6 en route.
Engine 6.
Engine 6 en route.
2.
Radio, is that fire ground 1 and we're going
So that was engine 2 and route. So that's where Scott was.
Affirmative, fire ground 1. All units, we did get a call at 2200 East Fusion. That seems to be where it's at. 2200 East Fusion, it's a church. All of our callers were saying lots of smoke coming from the roof. A lot of smoke coming from the roof. Fire ground 1. Confirming Tower 3, are you en route or?
Tower 3 is out of service. En route.
I'm clear, just confirming. You're engine 2 now.
We'll be arriving here shortly. We do have visible flames and heavy smoke. Visible flames and heavy smoke. Truck 2 will be command. Truck 2 will be command. Dispatch, go ahead and make this a second alarm.
Truck 2, I'm clear. Have a fully engulfed church fire. Need a second unit. BC, can you advise who you want?
Engine 5 is en route.
Engine 5 en route. Down on Fusion, church fire.
2200 Chief Road, Tabernacle Praise, cross streets on Meeker and 3. Command, engine 6 on scene.
Engine 6, come on in. Go ahead. Go ahead.
Man, truck 7.
And truck 7.
Do you want us coming in off of State Road 3 or Meeker?
Truck 7, this will not be on the corner of State Road 3 and Fusion. It will be east of there on Fusion, 2200.
Do you want us coming in off of 3 or Meeker? What side?
Meeker's going to be closer.
Where?
For command, we have a tanker en route. Must be tankers en route. Also counter will be starting one. Will you need another one from a volunteer at Bloodfill and Liberty?
Yes, you would go ahead and send those.
Engine 2 is on scene. Where do you want us, command?
Pull right up behind truck 2, please.
Here.
For command, have Bloodfill, Liberty, counter tankers en route. Do you have any direction you need them coming from?
We just need them to pull up behind truck 2 and engine 3. Right, dispatch.
The next door neighbor there says he has a big pond that's behind the church and you can use the water if you need it.
If you would, go ahead and notify the units coming in with the tankers. And my support.
Doing what we can to get our tanker there, trying to locate a key for it. If you need it right now, you might call for another county unit until I get this started.
I think we've got all the county units set this way that we can possibly get here.
Clear, I'll get this here as soon as humanly possible.
Lieutenant Racer. Go ahead and start backing out a little bit.
Clear, where should they go? Which trucks or what area? And can you advise where to have EMS go?
Have them come to the church. We got a firefighter down inside. He's not out yet.
Clear.
Everybody's going to the church, we got one track.
Command, this engine 5, we're on the south side on Fusion Road. Where do you want us? Come on, Command, repeat. Command, this is engine 5. We're on the south side of the building on this Fusion Road. Where do you want us? Engine 5, truck 7, bring your guys immediately to the front of the church. We've got firefighters down inside. We need your guys packed up, ready to go immediately. Engine 5 is clear. We're heading that way.
Yorktown advises they have a tanker available if you want them started.
Traffic for command.
Yorktown has a tanker available and ready if you want them.
Send all units that are tankers available.
Clear.
Copy.
Go ahead and turn another truck down that way 1040 until we find out more about the entrapment as well.
13's already clear direction. We're in route 1040. If you can contact them, if there's anyone injured, have a fireman walk to the east of their fire truck. Radio command.
Command, go ahead.
5101. We have a firefighter down the middle.
Clear.
Truck 2 command. 2 command. Truck 2 command. Command. We're wanting to go in this gallery.
Clear.
See if there's anything up down the hallway here. Copy, Captain Bell. Go ahead. Be careful, not get too far.
Hey, 13, as soon as you come down off of Fusion Road and Meeker here, pull into the scene, we're going to have a EMS triage station set up right here. You'll see where the squad is when we pull up.
Clear.
52 squad, go ahead and pull Albany truck in for standby.
There you go on their normal squad, you're going downtown.
They can go around the mall, be fine, just stage north.
Radio command. Radio command. Radio to command.
Command, go ahead.
Coming.
We've got 4 coming and you already have 4 on the scene. 4 on the scene and 4 coming. We've got 3 more we can call for if you want them.
Send me all tankers you got.
Got it.
52 squad 51 243, we have a rehab station set up at the entrance of Fusion Road right here at the entrance to the church.
Go ahead, Lieutenant Hunter. Oh, we can see in, the whole church is down. We can see everything. We got a pile of rubble probably 3 foot deep, but it's all on fire. We can't see anything. We're going to have to wait till we get it put out before we can go through it. if they come back here, this rear wall is still standing, but it looks like it could come down easy, so have them steer clear of this rear wall.
Copy. All units, this is command. Be advised, rear wall, west, south. Could collapse at any time. Stay away from it.
Repeating, rear wall could collapse at any time. Rear wall could collapse at any time. Information from command.
All right. So, obviously listening to that radio traffic, there's quite a bit of things that went on there that, you know, didn't need to go on, and, you know, again, this is my opinion. It probably should have been held off, or should have had those decisions or those things made in place prior to even this scenario happening. SOPs and SOGs, that's a, you know, a key thing. Having those, you know, for those second alarms, and for, you know, dispatch to know what companies they need to dispatch, and not asking for those, or asking the BC who they need.
Engine 122, medic 122.
As well as, you know, obviously having a victim down, you know, the BC took command at that time. You could hear the stress in his voice. You know, why he didn't take command when he arrived on scene originally, you know, I don't know. Again, it's one of those things that, you know, their SOPs, SOGs, whatever, you know, may state that the IC is the IC until otherwise, you know, needed. They didn't have a safety officer in place, and we'll see that once we go through the investigation notes. There's a lot of things that they didn't do, that they may have needed to do.
One thing with that, Bobby, from an IC standpoint, an incident like this is probably trying to gain clarity of what's truly going on before you assume that command of it, and that may be why there was a lag and delay. 'Cause obviously, as we listen to radio traffic, it would be hard to ascertain exactly where people are operating and what they're doing, but
Sure.
just a
I would
thought process.
Okay. You know, and on that too, the size up, I mean, flames and heavy smoke, that was it in a church. I mean, there's no name of church, no, you know, obviously the movement of the smoke is important. You know, the color of it, you know, the density, all those things are factors, you know, that we need to make sure that we're painting that picture and that they're painting that picture for those arriving crews. Not having that, you know, to me, you know, where is it located? Where at on the church? Obviously, there was two separate buildings with that church, so that's kind of a big deal. All right, so at 15:53 hours, the victim's fire department was dispatched for the report of a church fire. Again, the initial units responding was Engine 2, Engine 3, Engine 6, Tower 2 or Truck 2, and Rescue 2, the on-duty BC. Truck 2, Tower 2 responded from the west, coming around the seaside, south end of the church before pulling into the parking lot, which was located on the A side. This approach to the scene afforded arriving units a 360 view of the complex. The Truck 2 officer noted smoke coming from the roof and flames emitting from the gables of the seaside. Other firefighters from Truck 2 described the conditions as heavy black smoke from the roof and flames visible from the seaside gables. The Truck 2 officer immediately transmitted his size up again, which we heard, which was, you know, flames and heavy smoke. Asked for a second alarm and established IC as itself. The IC could not remember if the steeple was still standing on the south end of the roof at the time. A walk around of the church was not conducted by the IC. Again, that's, you know, important to do that 360. I know obviously arriving and doing a 360, but there's a lot of things going on in that truck as we're arriving, trying to get that picture. You know, and it's important to make that walk around or send someone around to notate those other hazards that might be connected with that building as well. Especially if you don't have a pre-plan done. You know, we're lucky enough that we have it, you know, in the BC buggy where he can look it up and see those hazards. But it's very important because things always change. You know, everybody's always remodeling or adding on. So again, if that steeple was up or down, I mean, that would have been a huge indicator for them. You know, the amount of fire that was there, maybe it was still up and it was just covered, who knows. Firefighters interviewed did not recall seeing non-emergency vehicles parked at the church. That would have indicated that the church might have been occupied at the time of the incident. Again, we've seen where truck 2 is positioned in the parking lot, engine 6. While Rescue 2 and BC pulled into the parking lot away from the suppression units, the driver of Rescue 2 placed the orange cone in front of this entry to signify a command post and the accountability tag drop point. All interior and roof personnel dropped their tags at the command post before entry. The church was secured, requiring a door on the A side be breached. After firefighter 1 breached the entry door with a 6-foot pike pole, the Rescue 2 officer and 4 firefighters, firefighter 1, firefighter 2 from Rescue 2, and firefighter 3 and 4 from truck 2 made the initial entry of the sanctuary, bringing in the charged single 200-foot section of 1 3/4 line. No additional equipment was initially brought in with them, such as thermal camera. 2 firefighters from engine 6 were tasked by BC with cutting the ventilation hole. They did the trench cut as close as possible to where the connecting hall roof met with the sanctuary roof, and there's a couple pictures, we'll see that, being sure that the sound the roof is, they get closer to the sanctuary. And we'll see on those photos. So obviously this is where the roof was vented, up here in the blue. And in that original picture, as we saw, the steeple was down and the fire was coming here out of the roof here. So a lot of factors. I don't know how far the fire had progressed at that point when they made that vent hole. We'll see in those other photos that you can see the vent hole as well as the fire here in the main sanctuary area. But that's a pretty far distance from where that fire is to vent. So, you know, we already know it's wind driven because those the wind was 10 to 15 miles per hour. On top of cutting the trench hole farther away from where we are as far as that fire goes. And again, it wasn't necessary. It's already through the roof. Do we have to cut a hole? Probably not, right? So taking those factors in and just thinking about those things as we're doing them. The driver from Rescue 2 laddered the connecting hull with the 20-foot ladder just left of where the firefighters made entry. The roof crew grabbed the roof saw, obviously went up to the roof and made the cut. Once positioned on the roof, made a 5-foot by 18-inch cut, but we're only able to initially remove a section measuring approximately 12 inches by 12 inches, cut over a rafter. So again, it really wasn't very effective anyways, right? A second 1 3/4 hose line was deployed from truck 2 for the roof crew to use in case they were met with fire. The BC then began to walk around the church complex, going counterclockwise from the command post on the A side. Initial interior crew indicated that visibility was good throughout the sanctuary, light haze at ceiling level. As they spread out, firefighter 3 stretched the hose line along the B side wall of the sanctuary all the way until he reached the raised platform situated in the front of the seawall. Firefighter 2 assisted with pulling an additional fire hose for firefighter 3 from the entry door before exiting the structure to retrieve a flashlight. At the same time, engine 3 and engine 2 arrived. I remember Scott was on engine 2, which was initially Tower 3 was marked out of service. Arrived on scene and observed heavy black smoke and visible fire that had vented on the south end of the roof. It is unclear if the steeple had toppled over at this point. While stretching the hose line, firefighter 3 observed firefighter 1 open up a small portion of the seaside wall. In the area of the CD corner, the ceiling had exposed a substantial amount of fire behind the raised platform. He hit it with the 1 3/4 until he reached the area behind the raised platform. Firefighter 1, firefighter 2 re-entered the structure to assist in finding attic access. The Rescue 2 officer met with firefighter 1 and firefighter 3 behind the raised platform, and they decided that an attic ladder was necessary to better access the fire. Firefighter 4 exited momentarily to retrieve an additional pipe pole to help firefighter 1. When firefighter 4 returned with the pipe pole, firefighter 5 and the victim were standing just in front of the raised platform within the sanctuary. Firefighter 5 and the victim had been ordered by the IC Truck 2 officer to follow the hose line in to see if the initial interior crew needed any assistance. Firefighter 4 exited the church again to retrieve an attic ladder. Firefighter 5 stated that when they entered the sanctuary, there was light white smoke and they could not see the seaside wall from the initial entry point. Before turning the corner to look at the seaside of the sanctuary, the BC was met by Engine 6 officer, where they observed the steeple tilting onto the sanctuary roof. The BC stated he observed the steeple fall and immediately attempted to call the IC over the radio and advised him of this, but no radio traffic was heard or recorded on the 911 transcripts following this attempts. Contact the IC over the radio. The BC immediately walked back to the command post to speak with the IC regarding the integrity of the roof. So obviously there he is there. But again, we don't know how long that had been down. It could have been down as soon as they arrived on the scene. It could have fallen, within a few minutes of them or seconds of them arriving on the scene. Again, that's where that initial 360 would have been nice to help note that. While waiting for the attic ladder, firefighter 3 and firefighter 1 took turns operating the hose line toward the ceiling in an attempt to control the fire. Firefighter 5 and the victim noticed fire coming from the recessed lighting within the ceiling above them. The victim stated to firefighter 5, "This could get bad really quick." Remember, Scott had 21 years of experience, 15 as a volunteer, 5 of those volunteer years as the fire chief, and then 6 years as a monthly firefighter. Once the attic ladder was delivered to the raised platform, a small portion of the ceiling fell into the sanctuary, hitting firefighter 2, exposing heavy amounts of fire above the ceiling level that was too much to be handled with a single hose line. The victim stated, "Firefighter 5, firefighter 2, and firefighter 4, we need to get out now." At approximately the same time, the Rescue 2 officer had a brief conversation with the IC over the radio about backing out of the structure. Almost simultaneously, a large section of the ceiling roof collapsed into the sanctuary where firefighters 2, 4, and 5 and the victim were standing. At the time of the collapse, fire pushed through the ventilation hole recently cut by Engine 6 firefighters. The roof crew was unaware the sanctuary roof had started to collapse. They had to be ordered off the roof by BC and driver of Engine 6. So again, it's important for us to be aware of our surroundings and make sure we're cognitive of what's going on, no matter what we're doing, especially if we're on that roof, cutting those holes. At the time of the collapse, Rescue 2 officer was standing with firefighter 1 and firefighter 3. The sanctuary became engulfed with fire, burning debris, and extreme heat. The Rescue 2 officer was knocked down by the falling debris, and visibility quickly became zero. Firefighter 1 was separated from Rescue 2 officer, and firefighter 3, firefighters 2, 4, and 5, and the victim standing in front of the raised platform were all separated following the collapse. Firefighter 3 assisted the Rescue 2 officer in getting up. They did not observe any other firefighters close to them. Firefighter 5 managed to make to the B-side window, which he broke out and escaped through the opening. Firefighter 5 stated to NIOSH investigators that he immediately looked back to see if any other firefighters had followed him out, but no one appeared. Firefighter 3 and Rescue 2 officer felt their way along the D wall until they found a window, which they broke and exited through, which we'll see later. Firefighter 1 and firefighter 2 and firefighter 4 made their way crawling over through church pews and fire debris until they were able to exit through the initial entry door to the command post. They all quickly checked with the IC, where they were notified that the victim was unaccounted for. So again, you can see where he came out that window there. exit. Chunk 2 officer relinquished command of the BC, took over responsibilities for search and rescue of the victim. The IC advised Engine 5 and Truck 7 were to report radio communications regarding responding tankers, which we heard. Engine 3 officer advanced an 1 3/4 hose line, which was the original hose line to the roof, through the initial entry door of the opening into the sanctuary, where they met another collapse of the roof and fire debris throughout the sanctuary. And then that's when it was deemed unsafe. Truck 2 was ordered by the BC to sound the air horn to notify firefighters to evacuate. So this is from the initial search and rescue into the building from the A side, where they forced entry to the door and attempted to locate the victim. Again, you can see obviously the amount of fire, but it's kind of hard to see, but back here, the secondary collapse happened. All right, so it was determined that it was a lightning strike around 10:45 hours on the day of the incident. Light smoke around the south end of the church was observed by this individual at the time. And approximately 15:45, the same individual passed again and called 911 to advise them that there was still light smoke around the roof of the church. They believe that it hit a gas line as well as some electrical lines that were running inside that attic space. It is believed that the fire smoldered in the attic void below the steeple until combustible materials within the attic reached their ignition temperature. And again, it contained blown-in insulation and no other stored combustible items. Within the sanctuary below, there was a steeple would have been situated. And they believe that they took a section of that during their investigation from this steeple that they could find, and it did have copper wires running off of it. So they're pretty sure it ran down and had lightning rod ran into the facility. Firefighters were able to open the ceiling and view heavy conditions and blue skies, indicating that the roof was falling and the steeple had already toppled over from the vertical position. So again, those interior crews were able to open those ceilings and see blue skies, indicating that the roof was falling. Wind appeared to be a factor as it pushed the fire. Connecting hallway met the northeast corner. Fire then quickly spread to that area. So again, there's that picture we saw earlier with that steeple toppled over. So here's obviously where the original fire area was, and we can see back here on this other side of this ridge line of the church there, the roof, is where they made their vent hole. So again, there's multiple factors. From the BC corner, roof is collapsed into the sanctuary. And again, our vent hole's on the other side there. All right, so contributing factors. Initial size up did not fully consider the impact of limited water supply, available staffing, oxygen type, and lightweight roof truss system. Risk management principles not effectively used, high risk, low frequency incident. Rapid fire progression, again, it was wind driven. As we've seen in those photos, I mean, and again in the timeline, within 15 minutes of them being on scene. Offensive versus defensive strategy. Failure to fully develop and implement occupational safe and healthy program. Fire burned undetected within the roof, void space for unknown period of time, and roof collapse. According to the death certificate, the coroner listed the victim's cause of death as smoke inhalation. So the A side, so this is where they made entry here and came in, and we'll see on these other photos as they progress their way through. So the initial fire was on that seaside there, just where the raised platform is. Again, 1 3/4 hose, 200 feet section. So the location of the individuals, firefighters that were inside, as well as the victim. If you remember, firefighter 5 went out the window on the big side there. And then our vent hole is going to be up over this area here that they cut, that 12 by 12 vent hole. All right, so recommendations. Fire department should ensure that complete situational size up is conducted. Again, first officer on the scene conducting an initial 360 size up of the incident. Proper size up begins from the moment the alarm is received. So which should include pre-plans and evaluation of our water supply in that area. Location and volume of the fire, required fire flow, building construction, commercial versus residential structure. So again, this is where we talk about that 1 3/4 versus a 1.5 deuce. Our water supply, length of time that the fire has been burning, conditions upon arrival, occupancy, and fuel load, exposures, roof and wall loads, time of day. Again, this was 15, late in the afternoon, 15:45. Weather conditions. Even before the IC takes command of an incident, he will be faced with having to determine a critical task must be performed to bring the incident under control, and whether he can handle delegating these tasks before becoming overwhelmed. The IC may need to consider assigning an individual to be his aide or operations sector so that critical tasks can be delegated, carried through, and effectively supervised. During the incident, initial arriving officer took command and placed his command post directly outside the initial entry door on the A side. And if you remember, obviously, everything's on that Charlie side, but the other side of it is that all that smoke from the wind and everything was blowing right back into where they were at, where those trucks were parked. So I'm sure visibility for him to be able to, to see what's going on with the fire from the outside, from a perspective there, was probably a little difficult. Fixed command posts should be established in positions that provide the IC with the widest possible field of view of the incident. When the IC's view is blocked, obstacles like apparatus positioning structures, again, saying that he needed to move. Initial IC did not conduct a full 360-degree size up. When the acting BC arrived on scene, he began to walk around the structure where he discovered the steeple had toppled over, indicating potential for further collapse of the structure. The initial size up failed to identify proper strategy and tactics for a large non-residential structure. All right, fire department should use risk management principles, all structure fires. So while it is recognized firefighting is an inherently dangerous occupation, which we all know, management principles established by the fire service are based on the philosophy that greater risk will be assumed when there is lives to be saved and the level of acceptable risk of firefighters is much lower. The IC with input from the assigned ISO or division group supervisors responsible for evaluating conditions of the structure prior to determining safe tactics for firefighting. Again, so it should have been standardized strategic decision-making model, which we've talked about. Present the occupants in building, a realistic evaluation of the occupant survivability and rescue potential, size, construction of the building, aging condition. Again, all those things would have been noted in a pre-plan, which did not partake. These fireground factors must be weighed against the risk management plan. All right, so Chief Dunn states the following: when no other person's life is in danger, the life of the firefighter has a higher priority than the fire containment. He also states that protection of life is the highest goal in the fire service. When a life is clearly threatened, there is no risk too great. As most fires, however, lives are not clearly endangered. At most fires, then, the priority of firefighting is the protection of the firefighters' lives. In general terms, the risk management plan must be considered with the following. Risk nothing for what is already lost. Choose defensive operations. Extend limited risk in a calculated way to protect savable property. Consider offensive operations. And extend very calculated risk to protect savable lives. Considered offensive operations. So the first arriving officer and the IC must make judgment of what risk people or property. The parking lot was vacant at the time. The complex was secured, requiring the church doors to be breached. The volume of fire discovered in the attic was too large for initial 1 3/4 hose line and not easily accessible for the firefighters. Also, the fire department did not have sufficient water and significant fire flow to extinguish the fire in a non-residential structure. All right, recommendation number 3. Department should conduct, again, pre-incident planning, which we've talked about. So that's, another big thing for them. And knowing that water supply, a plan having in place to have those tankers already en route once that initial dispatch comes out. Fire department should ensure that viable water supply is adequate for fire flow. Again, making sure that wherever they need to get that water supply from, that they are calling and getting that, and that they're using the appropriate size line for their initial attack. Recommendation number 5, fire department should be aware of potential hazards associated with lightweight wood truss structures that have been exposed to fire for an extended period of time. As we all know, with those gusset plates and everything else, they fail at a pretty low temperature. So that's always a big concern in knowing your structures, knowing those buildings. Exterior fire personnel such as ISO, ventilation crews, and IC should have been evaluating the structure for potential collapse. They should have been observing visible winds, fire and wind conditions, dead loads on roofs, visible instability of exterior load-bearing walls. During this incident, the interior crew had difficulty finding an attic access where they could view the extent of the fire. They were unaware of just how much fire was located above them. Again, that's where it's important popping that ceiling, as we're making that entry, having those tools. And if you remember, they didn't have any other tools with them. All they had was the hose line. Making sure that, and they had a pipe pole at the initial when they reached the door. But just making sure we're taking those things with us so we can check those areas as we go through. So again, maintaining situational awareness at all times during the fire is paramount. Fire department should develop, implement, enforce written SOPs. Again, we've talked about that, having those SOPs of what they need to do and what needs to get done and what time frame when they arrive on those scenes. Fire department should train fire personnel to communicate interior and exterior conditions to the incident commander as soon as possible to provide regular updates. So again, as we listen to that radio traffic, and I know that sometimes we, as officers and backup officers, and we get a little aggravated sometimes at Chief Porter because we're in there working and we think he's hitting us up all the time. But again, he's seen a lot different conditions outside than what we're seeing on the inside, and having those updates and making sure that we're radioing that information to that IC and letting them know, hey, this is what we see, especially when they finally did pull the ceiling or area and they see sky. That's kind of an important factor to make sure that information gets passed on. Interior size up is just as important as an exterior size up. The BC and Engine 6 officer observed the steeple toppling onto the roof, but the radio traffic was never heard. So it was unknown. Interior conditions could have changed the IC strategy or tactics. Interior crews can aid in the IC process. Again, having those condition update, that can report of what's going on. Chief Brunacini states that the critical fire ground factors, including Interior and exterior conditions are among many of the items that IC must consider when evaluating tactical situations. These items provide a checklist of major topics involved in size-up decision-making, initiating operations, and review and revision. All right, recommendation number 8, again, fire departments familiarize, continually train all personnel on building construction types and safety considerations. We're lucky enough and blessed enough here that, we get that quite a bit. But knowing, going out and doing some area familiarization and making sure that we're pre-planning or just walking around new structures and knowing what's going on in our area is very important. Recommendation number 9, fire departments should also ensure that a separate incident safety officer, independent from the incident command. So obviously there was a lot of things going on at that fire at once for the IC to be under control of. And it just, at some point having that extra help, having those people to be your other eyes and ears, on the inside and the outside is very important for that IC. And additionally, the IC relies upon firefighters, again, for feedback, fire ground conditions, in order to make those changes in that strategy and tactical plan that we have. Fire departments and dispatch centers should ensure that emergency traffic over a radio such as a mayday is effectively monitored, receiving the highest priority during the incident. As we heard, there was unintelligible radio traffic and what they thought was the sound of the collapse in the background, but there was no mayday call. Firefighter Scott Davis never, or none of the other victims or firefighters that were involved in that collapse at no point radioed a mayday. So it's very important that we exercise those skills and that, no matter what that situation is, as for anybody, we'd rather hear a mayday on the radio and resolve the issue within a couple of minutes than we would not hear anything at all, then, time go past to realize that, there's a serious situation going on. Incident, again, the victim was identified as missing after firefighters escaping the collapse, went directly to the IC to advise them that the victim was unaccounted for. Again, how much time did it take for them to go to find the IC instead of radioing, to let them know, hey, there's somebody missing. Radio communications regarding tankers and apparatus placement continued at the same incident channel as the search for the victim was being conducted. So again, making sure that, our dispatchers know and everyone knows that we stop, the mayday or that victim or those people are the priority and everything else can wait. I don't think the IC needs to tell any one of us where to park our trucks or to which direction we need to come in or whether or not we need 2 or 1 or 5 additional tankers. That stuff is things that should be made by those incoming officers as well as decisions made by the dispatcher. Fire departments should ensure that Mayday training programs are developed and implemented so that they adequately prepare firefighters to call Mayday. And then a RIT team, making sure that they're readily available for those on those fire ground. Ensure incident commanders, firefighters understand the influence of ventilation on fire behavior and effectively coordinate ventilation with suppression techniques. Again, we've talked, was it necessary for them, to cut a hole? No, not with the amount of fire and everything they had in there, and where they cut it. Was it necessary? They still didn't know what they had, where it was at. So there's a lot of, factors there that, proper ventilation can reduce the risk of a backdraft by reducing potential secondary fire gases, smoke. So we know that properly ventilating a structure fire will reduce the tendency of rising heat, smoke, and again, a 12 by 12 hole isn't going to do much for anything anyways. Consider the following on how effective ventilation, who will ventilate, what type of ventilation, when to ventilate, where, why, and how. And what are the expected results? During the incident, the ventilation hole was cut behind where the firefighters were working interiorly, the initial entry point. The idea of the trench cut And this application was stopped, was to stop the fire from spreading to the sanctuary into the connecting hallway, but again, they weren't even able to complete that. You know, the initial thought was to do a trench cut. But again, a 12 by 12 hole. The wind conditions drew the fire through the common attic space shared by the sanctuary and connecting hallway. That's it.